And starting over means we're going to have to start with lower wages. And eventually, if we become more productive, wages can rise. But right now, they have to fall to reflect the fact that our economy is no longer as productive as it was in the past because we don't have the industries anymore. They're gone.
Now, you talk about what seems to me is going to involve maybe a lot of legislation to make these things happen. One of the criticisms that I think I've read a lot about is that whoever they might be, criticize that you don't have a whole lot of experience in writing legislation. How do you respond to that?
Well, we don't need to write legislation. The legislation is the problem. We need to repeal the legislation. And unfortunately, nobody in Congress has experience repealing legislation because nothing's ever repealed. And so in that respect, I've got the same amount of experience as everybody else. And that's why I want to go to Congress. I don't want to write any new legislation. I want to repeal the legislation that is the source of the problem. It's the rules and regulations that have been legislated into existence that have distorted the free market and have created these problems. And the other thing I want to abolish is all kinds of government programs. I want to cut the budget. The federal budget right now that Obama just announced for the next fiscal year is $3.8 trillion. That's absurd. We shouldn't be spending anywhere near $3.8 trillion. We shouldn't even be spending $2 trillion a year. We're only collecting about $2.4 trillion in taxes. I mean, if we were to get rid of the budget deficit, we'd have to get rid of at least 40% of the budget right now. In fact, for every dollar the government is collecting in taxes, they're spending $1.60. I mean, that's like somebody earns $100,000 a year and they decide to spend $160,000 a year. It doesn't work. So we need to shrink government dramatically, which means we got to abolish programs and cut spending, not just freeze spending at some future date, but cut spending, cut it substantially right now. And that's what I want to do. And if I get elected, I'm going to work to actually shrink government so that fewer people get checks from government and so that people who are getting checks from government get smaller checks. That has to happen. And if we do that, then the people who are paying the taxes won't have to pay as much in taxes. And if the government stops borrowing all this money, then businesses might have access to capital so they can expand and make investments and hire people. But as it stands right now, no one's going to get hired because nobody's got capital because the government is taking it all.
Peter, as far as the Michigan perspective, like I say, we've been decimated. We've lost the claim of the Motor City, and it's very difficult for people that are struggling now to think about investing when, in fact, they really don't even have a job. They're worried about how to even maintain status quo. Now, I want to get into that a little bit later about some ideas you have for people who do want to invest. But if you look at it from a Michigander's perspective, who are, in your opinion, the key Michigan politicians, one, that should be ousted, and who are some of the Michigan politicians that are on the fringe of either being elected or are currently in office that you know of that as Michiganders we should respond to and we should support?
Yeah, look, I don't know the names of the senators or the congressmen from Michigan. I'm not really familiar with the delegation. I'm not familiar with them for most of the country. But I certainly think that anybody who's been an incumbent is a likely target for voting out of office because the incumbents on both sides of the aisle, whether Republicans and Democrats, were culpable in what happened. And I think we do need to make some changes. I think we need to bring people in who are not tainted by this system and this process, who can bring a fresh perspective and understanding of economics of the country, and people who really are going into politics not because they want it for a career, but because they feel it's necessary for the good of the country. I mean, that's why I'm running. I don't need to be a United States Senator. I have a much better job in the private sector, so it's going to cost me a lot of time and a lot of money to be a United States Senator. And so I'm not doing it because it makes sense for me. I'm doing it because it makes sense for the country, and so as an American, I benefit, but certainly as an individual, it's not a wise move for me. And so people know that I'm going there. I'm not going there to sell out my principles, which is what most people do when they're elected, because after all, when they get elected, all they care about is getting reelected. They want to stay there. They want to play the game so that they can, advance up the political ladder. I don't want to play any games. All I want to do is help clean up the mess that these career politicians made, And that's the only reason I'm going there. So I'm not going to spend any of my time trying to get reelected. I'm not going to spend any time fundraising. I'm not going to spend any time, trying to ingratiate myself with a Republican leadership so that I get the right assignments or I get their support when it comes time to run for reelection. I want to shake up the leadership of the Republican Party. It's been a disaster. Look at all the things that were done when the Republicans had the majority. They were the ones that were in charge. When the real estate bubble was inflating, they did nothing to do something about that. So, I don't think they're as bad as the Democrats, but, they are part of the problem. Now that the Republicans are in the minority, a lot of Republicans in Congress are saying a lot of the right things. Well, where were these Republicans 5 years ago, 10 years ago? They were still there. Why do they wait until they can't do anything, right? Why do they wait until they're so far in the minority and that they no longer have the White House to actually say the right things? It's because they know that nothing's going to get passed. But the minute the Republicans are in control, then they act just like the Democrats they criticize. And so I don't even have any confidence in Republicans because I don't have any confidence in what they're going to do. I know what they say. They're going to say all the right things to get us to support them, but they're not going to do any of them if they ever have the power because they're politicians. So we've got to find people who are not politicians so we can trust that what they're saying is true and they're going to live up to these principles, not abandon them as soon as they get into office.
Peter, one of the premises on my show, What's It Worth, is that we don't just, I'm going to say, complain and point fingers. We're not whistleblowers. I don't bring on anybody that just is going to sit there with the right criticizing the left and the left criticizing the right. What I'm going to do is we're going to take a commercial break, and when we come back, I want you to provide I want you to provide the listeners with some really good, concrete advice about how they can, let's say, spiritually start to move their minds and their heads into the right kinds of pursuits. And then secondly, what they can physically do to, enhance their position financially and politically. We're going to take a commercial break. We'll be right back with Peter Schiff. We're back. This is Anthony DiMaggio. You're listening to What's It Worth on 103.5 FM, WMUZ. We're here with world-renowned economist Peter Schiff, the Republican candidate for Senate in Connecticut. Peter, we were talking about the fact that the administration, the Obama administration, and I would say past administrations really haven't listened to some of the economic wisdom that you and other people that have the same line of thinking have to turn this country around. What can an individual do under an umbrella of an administration that's not making a very fertile field for most of America? Is there a good opportunity for an individual, in light of these mistakes and these policies, to make a decent return on their investments today?
Well, sure. I mean, the government is doing everything wrong, but that doesn't mean you have to make similar mistakes, with your investments. Individually, we can get it right. And the key is to understand how all these government errors, how the failed policy is going to impact the investment landscape, how it's going to impact the value of assets and the value of currencies. And when you understand the consequences of the reckless monetary policy, of the fiscal stimulus, of the regulations being passed and being proposed in Congress and by the President, you understand how destructive those policies are to the U.S. economy and to the value of the U.S. dollar. And therefore, to protect your wealth from being attacked, from that assault by government, you need to take defensive actions. You need to do things like own physical gold and silver as opposed to having dollars in a bank account like Dave Ramsey's mentioned. You want to hold gold and silver. You want to also look around the world to see where you can make investments that will do well. What parts of the world are likely to benefit over the changing dynamics, where countries are doing it right. Look for areas of the world where there are high savings rates, where there's a lot of manufacturing, a lot of exporting, a lot of natural resources. And there are places around the world that I think you're going to see vibrant economic growth, and there's no reason not to participate in that. It would be better if we could have good opportunities to participate in the United States, but given the fact that those opportunities are not here, it doesn't mean that we can't avail ourselves of opportunities that do exist in other parts of the world, particularly some of the emerging markets in countries like China. And so people just need to, understand